Welcome back to Under Oath. Welcome back to Under Oath. Today on the show, we have writer, editor, director, producer, Matt Hamachek from the 10-part documentary series, The Dynasty. Matt, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, no problem at all. You know, your body of work is just, it's like everything anybody could be interested in. It's amazing how you get on these shows, whether it be Amanda Knox, whether it be cartels, and now you're doing the Patriots. I mean, you know, how fortunate are you?
Oh, what is Harbaugh always say? Who has it better than us, right? To be able to tell these stories. I think the thing that I have always been interested in. I was a film nerd growing up and went to undergraduate film school, and fell in love with Hitchcock movies of all things. And one of the things that we learned while we were studying Hitchcock was that there was always this thing that sort of drove the plot along with all of his stories, but it wasn't what the movie was actually about. It was always about something much deeper. And I think that when you look at films like Amanda Knox or Tiger, the last thing that I directed, and then this film about the New England Patriots, is that, yes, Amanda Knox is about a woman who's over in Italy and is accused of murder. Tiger is about a golfer, and the New England Patriots are about the most winning franchise in NFL history. But at the core of all of these stories is something that's much more human and important. And in the New England Patriots story, you find these people who have, created something unimaginable, which is a group of people who come together and they sacrifice their egos and everything else, and they basically they do what's best for the team, and that's the foundation of what the the quote unquote Patriot way is. But over the course of 20 years, despite the culture that they have created, sustaining that for so long, eventually, at the end, for the final 3 episodes of our 10-part series, you start to see the foundation of this thing fall apart, and really the entire dynasty comes apart at the seams towards the end of it.
The one thing about the Patriots that everyone, either you loved them or you hated them, and that was a very weird thing because people had this great hate for a team that was pretty vanilla, minus, a couple of the characters. They were pretty they played well. So why do you think this hate just came from?
Well, we have a very interesting relationship with success in our country, right? What we want to do is take the underdog, the David in the story, and we want to build them up and root for them. But then the second that they become Goliath, we want to see them come tumbling down. And in a lot of ways, that was true with the Tiger Woods story as well, right? Everybody was rooting for him when he was, coming up, and then, as he started to accumulate everything, people want to tear him down. And that happened a lot with the Patriots. And that probably, some would argue, put a target on their back. And then, they had already become the evil empire, but then they were caught cheating with Spygate. And so that added fuel to it. But then, as you get into the later years, we have these moments in this archive where you hear people in other parts of the country on radio and TV, and they say, Tom Brady, the handsome guy with the supermodel wife that you love to root against, right? And I think when people find too much success in America, there's something about us. I don't even know if it's America. It may be just like, people in general. We want to bring them down and we want to hate for them. And so, the episode that just aired last week on Friday, people talk about how when the Patriots were 18-0 coming in to play the New York Giants in the Super Bowl that year, everybody was rooting for them to fail because it felt like even though they'd been caught cheating, they continued to find success.
When you think about certain things, we're comparing, Tom Brady to Tiger Woods, and it seems an unfair comparison because, I'm from Orlando. The Tiger Woods thing was the worst kept secret here, but the rest of the world wasn't aware of it. But I mean, you're thinking Deflategate. I mean, just these silly little things. Oh yeah, they filmed practices. I mean, that every other team had some kind of concept of it, but it was like so horrific because these guys were so good that we had to blame their success on that. They were successful because of this and that instead of they were just a really well coached team and they had a great heart at the center of it.
Yeah, and I think to go back to what you said earlier, the only comparison between Tiger and Tom Brady really is that the both of them worked their way to their success, right? They weren't necessarily the most talented, but their work ethic got them there. And then, yeah, I think that with the Patriots story, look, everybody was looking for something, and they found it. And in the interesting thing about Deflategate, and we go into both Spygate, Deflategate, the Aaron Hernandez story, why Malcolm Butler was benched in the Super Bowl, and all of the stuff that led to the end of the dynasty. But with Deflategate, the thing that really interested me was this. And, we go into the details of did he do it or not a little bit, but I found this piece of archival when we were starting to look through the 35,000 hours that we had access to. And it was from one of the national morning shows, on one of the big networks. I can't remember which one it was. But it starts out, and the anchor goes, "We begin our day with the ongoing saga of Deflategate." And he goes into whatever's happening in the court system that day. And then a couple minutes later, he goes, "And in other news, ISIS has beheaded another hostage." And when you see something like that, I remember sitting there watching that and just thinking, oh, this is the sort of, in a way, the framework of this entire episode is, why did our country become so obsessed with whether or not 2 pounds of air pressure was in a football or not? In my mind, if he did it, it's an equipment violation and he should be punished for it, and then we move on. But instead, it became sort of this national crisis on the biggest scale. And, again, it goes back to this larger conversation about success and why we care about these things. And we sort of see the hysteria on both sides, whether it's the people who wanted to see Tom Brady be brought down, but also the people in New England who, there are people who went to the league offices and got arrested and thrown in jail because they thought that there was a conspiracy against Tom Brady and the Patriots.
When I see documentaries, when I see different stories, being an attorney, being an ex-sports agent, being an entertainer and a writer, I always wonder, how important the story is in comparison to the truth we're trying to tell. And if it doesn't bleed, then it doesn't lead. So, you as an editor, you're putting all this information together. And in a way, you're trying to put this story in place and you got your ups and your downs. I mean, how tough is it as you're putting all this information together to go, okay, I want this to be, news, or I want this to be accurate, or I want this to be a story? I mean, is it just a bundle?
The interesting thing is I wasn't a fan of the team, and so I got to sit across from the people that were actually there and ask them questions because I just didn't know that much about the Patriots when I sat down. So I was able to ask them the questions of what was it like to be in the room when this happened or when that happened. And, over the course of doing 70 interviews with these guys, I started to hear what they thought was important, right? And so sometimes when you're doing a project and you have access, like with Tiger, I didn't have access to the people that were actually, I didn't have Tiger, I didn't have his inner circle. But, with this one, it was, in a way, it was kind of like, all right, I got to get out of the way a little bit here and let the people who were in the room tell their version of what happened. And that's what made this so rare, because the Patriots never really talked all that much throughout these 20 years. You didn't really hear what was going on in the locker room, and that was by design. And then whenever you did hear something, it was kind of like through anonymous sources, and it would say a person close to so-and-so says, blah, 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 blah. And you'd be like, well, is this really somebody close to them, or is this just, the guy who's sweeping up the trash in the building or whatever? And so to be able to have them sit down and look in the camera and say, these are my stories, what was so important to me. And the other thing, it's a great question. The other thing that I wanted to do is, yes, it has to be the unvarnished telling of the story. And that means you have to go into some of the, not sort of hagiography of the Patriots parts of this story. But I wanted to make sure as you watch this thing, like let's say towards the end when the fracturing of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady's relationship is something that we discussed. Whatever side you are on by the end of listening to these guys, I want you to be able to say, well, I disagree with the decision that that person made, but I also understand why they made that. And I never wanted to have heroes and villains. I didn't want to have build up a straw man just to be able so you could kick them over, right? You watch things sometimes where it's just like, all right, I'm going to let the person say the dumbest thing that they've said in this interview, and then I'm going to make them the fall guy for all of this or something like that. And I find that to be inappropriate, but also just boring storytelling, right? And so I want this to be complex and nuanced and for you to understand why everybody's doing what they're doing and to get to the heart of this deeply human story at its core.
When you're doing this stuff and you talk about these interviews and getting these people in the stand, it's not like doing a deposition where they have to be there. These person volunteer, they sit down, and you have to build trust with these people. You also have to be concerned that they're going to say something that they realize they shouldn't have said and maybe just walk out. I mean, how do you sit there when you want something and you're afraid you're not going to get it? How far do you push?
I think you push and you make sure that every single person answers every single question, right? So let's take Bill Belichick, for example. I knew going in that he probably, I wasn't positive, but did I think that he really wanted to sit down and talk about Spygate? Did I think that he wanted to talk about, why Malcolm Butler was benched for the Super Bowl? Did I think that he wanted to talk about, why his and Tom's relationship eventually fell apart? I didn't think so. But I remember when I was watching the 2007 season, the Patriots were undefeated. They went to play against the Washington football team, formerly known as the Redskins. And in the fourth quarter, fourth down, not very much time left on the clock. They're up 45-0. And Bill Belichick decides to go for it, and they score a touchdown, and they go up 52-0. And a press conference afterwards happens, and Bill Belichick is asked, why'd you do that? And sort of like the reporter almost felt like it was inappropriate. And Bill Belichick's response was, what do you want me to do, kick a field goal? And that's one of the things that I always loved about Bill Belichick, even though I wasn't a fan, is he never took his foot off the gas. And so I felt that the way to honor and respect him was to sit down and say, sort of the same way he approached everybody that he sort of went up against, is to say, look, you're going to answer the same questions that everybody else has to answer. And, I'm also not going to kick a field goal, and you just have to ask the questions. And that's the way that it went with everybody on the project.
Now, with about 2 minutes left, a lot of people don't appreciate the editing portion of what you do, and they don't realize how important it is and how it basically makes or breaks, a project. Was that something you're going, I'd rather be an editor or a director, or editing is just the complete control of the product?
So I was an editor for 20 years, as well as a writer and producer. And that's sort of how I came up. And I think the thing that you're right about is that, what normally happens in a documentary, and it varies from director to director, is that they go out, they get the interviews, and they get archival footage. In our case, we had 35,000 hours, or so of archive, and they basically give these things to the editors, and together you sort of find out the story. So over the course of 20 years, I got to work with some of the best documentary filmmakers in the business, but I also got to edit and put together their stories. And so you realize the things that you like about that and the way that other people like to tell stories, and you realize what you don't like. And so by the time I got to Tiger, which was the first thing that I truly directed, and then with this project, I felt like, I understood the style and whatever you want to call it of storytelling that I liked. And this was really the first time. I have a long-term collaborator, a guy named Dan Kohler, who I have worked with, when I was editing. He was an assistant editor and then became an editor with me, and he has come along with me and is now my lead editor on all of these projects. And editing is such an incredibly important part of it. And so you always want to have people you can trust, and who don't necessarily, they might have the same style of storytelling you do, but you also want to surround yourself with people who are going to push you and say, I don't like this. I want this to be a little bit different. And here's why. And okay, you might not agree with me, but just take a look at this scene. I've cut it this way. And I want you to see like how these things bounce off of each other. And it's always good to surround yourself with people who will tell you no, because I think sometimes, whether it's in the football world or any other world, as people find success, they push away the no people and sort of only leave the yes people around them. And I think that's a lesson that I've learned, over time, is to make sure you're always surrounded by the people that will tell you no.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time, and thank you so much and for educating our audience. And I look forward to talking to you again, Matt.
Thanks so much for having me on.